Card.
Cut.
Card.
Action.
Action.
Hi, welcome to Art Tale. We're a podcast for connecting artists within and outside of the community. I'm Sally.
And I'm David.
And I'm Ravi.
Yes, and today we're sitting down with our president of CalArts to hear his perspective on CalArts and also get to know him better.
So we just wanted to start out with getting to know you. I was just curious, like, what's your favorite piece of art, film, or music that has inspired you recently?
Recently or ever? The ever is usually the question that happens.
Okay.
Whoa,
right.
whoa.
I mean, and there are a lot.
How about both?
So I sometimes tell the story of how I ended up wanting to study music and study the arts and how that happened in high school. So when I was in high school, I like lots of things, right? And so even younger, I would go to the public library and I'd program computers, and then I would watch like great performances on PBS. And this one time there was this Indian conductor. There's a conductor and he was brown, and I was like, oh, who's that? That's great. Turns out it's Zubin Mehta. It was the New York Philharmonic. But you know, the idea that Indians could be conductors or orchestras is like, whoa, that's cool. Like that's a great, that's interesting, right? And I was very involved in different political campaigns and different stuff, organizing. I got very into, there's an old firehouse that they turned into an art center. So I took photography lessons and I learned how to do that. My uncle had got me a camera. So lots of different things when I was younger. And then as I got into high school, it was a number of different kinds of works that really started to sort of change my perspective on things. There was a retrospective of the artist Romar Bearden at the University Art Museum, kind of in the town that I lived in, Oklahoma. And it was kind of his first, I think, retrospective. And it was really fantastic. I mean, this is if you don't know Romar Bearden, you can look him up, but very important Harlem Renaissance and depiction of jazz and musicians engaged in the space. And I could feel the rhythm of what's happening when I was looking at when I was looking at his paintings, right? And I was just like, this is amazing. It's the first time those kind of things have happened. And as luck would have it, we started. I was reading different books, and we ended up for school reading Ellison's The Invisible Man, which was really, really important, and kind of in this moment of thinking about the Black experience, that Langston Hughes poems, Zora Neale Hurston, and so it's this space of sort of Black literature, and in high school that kind of really was like, oh, I mean, I was good at science, I was good at math, I wanted to help people, I like young people, so I want to be a doctor, maybe a pediatrician, I don't know, right? And it just occurred to me in that moment, like, what, you know, doctors help people live, but art gives people purpose, makes them want to live. And so that was suddenly it was a thing that I had to sort of go on and chase. And music was very strong in the public schools, and so I was playing, and I started playing jazz, and that really was because of Miles Davis, Dizzy Gillespie, lots of trumpet, players. And so, Miles and his whole career was a real inspiration. So rather than just pieces of work, you think about like Kinda Blue, and you think about Miles Smiles, and you think about Bitches Brew and all. But each of those sort of reflects this evolution of what he did, from when he was playing with Charlie Parker and on. So that it's not like one work, but it's like a space of work of Miles Davis as the artist, right?
Right.
A space of work of Romar Bearden as an artist. Those are really sort of influential. And they remain to this day. I mean, when those things happen, it's important. All of those kind of associations and understandings come back when I hear that work or when I see them, which is very powerful.
Yeah, that's cool.
And just to continue about art and why it matters, can you talk a little bit more about why it matters to you?
Well, I did say, art gives people purpose. It lets people understand, artists sort of shape a world of the way the world could be. And I often say this, right? Like, artists think about the future. And so that making new things and thinking about the way that the future world could be, the shaping those models of the world is very powerful, right? It's that human imagination and letting us understand that. And that comes from storytelling, that comes from object making, that comes from music making, it comes from all of these places, right? And thinking about what that is. And it's a great synergy of of the of all of, you know, you think about the self as having three parts, right? There's the rational, or thinking, and there's the emotional, and then there's the somatic, the embodied, the physical, you know, in the space. And the arts are a great synergy of those three things, and it allows people to get communication, receive something, and really engage like all three parts of really who we are as people.
We also would just like to know a bit about the process of you becoming the president of CalArts. Like, what does that entail? I mean, we all kind of understand what it entails to like apply to a job and
Yeah.
you know, get hired that way. But
Yeah.
I've always been curious about like how did
I
you?
just wanted to be in a president.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you, I didn't sort of start saying, "Oh, I want to be the president of a school" or
Yeah, right.
something. That's right.
Mhm.
But and I do make the joke. I say if you stay somewhere long enough, to make you the boss, right? So there's something to that. I mean, ultimately, there's an interesting book right now. The former education editor of the Los Angeles Times has a book related to like maybe you don't need to go to college. And the interesting thing about that book is that she's telling stories of different trades and different things that happen, and people have access to those. And college isn't necessarily the pathway to that. College is doing something different. It's sort of expanding your mind and giving you opportunities that are slightly different than those things. But everything that she's saying in that book is really required for having to do something. You have to work hard. You have to have your eyes wide open. You have to make connections. You have to do all of those things. And so, I mean, I really did. I spent 16 years at SUNY Purchase before I came here, but I was in different jobs every 5 years or so, right? And so what happened was, I was there and I was working in this intersection. I was in the art and design school and at the intersection of technology and art and thinking about how that would go into the curriculum. So I started working with faculty members. Then I started looking at the systems and the way we recruited and did a lot of the stuff. And it's like, well, what if we did this? We'd be able to find different students around the country and around the world that don't know about us, right? And so that sort of increased the number of students who were applying, and it was really interesting. And so then I had a head of the department who said, "Why don't you come be the assistant director?" Which was really great. So someone believed in me, the head of the department. And then when she left, I had earned the trust of the faculty members in that department, right? And so they all said, "Well, why don't you stand to be the director?" So there was a search. I stood for it, and then even though I was already there, I got that. And so that kind of it was those opportunities that you sort of were there, but I wasn't looking for that necessarily in either of those two things. But once that process of like where those faculty trusted me, they asked me to do something, I did it, and I started to realize I was doing big multimedia projects with artists and museums, filmmakers, and you know, like choreographers. And it was like, well, this is its own kind of project, the school, right? And so I looked at the school itself kind of like an artwork or like a big project that had all these pieces to it. And then that just kept happening. They asked me to be the dean of all the arts. At SUNY Purchase, you have arts, and then you have like a liberal arts college. So it's like half and half kind of thing. And so I was the person who was in charge of all the arts. So the schools were like art and design, music, theater, dance, arts management, that kind of thing. And so it's not unlike CalArts. It was like that whole half, right? And then the phone rang, and my predecessor was retiring after 29 years. He was here a long time. And I knew CalArts. It's a very important place, and so much great stuff has happened here. And it was super interesting. I had never lived in Los Angeles before. They're like, "Were you interested in applying?" Right? And so the phone rang. And so someone called, and they knew what I was doing out in the world. And again, when you're doing those things, and so someone says, "Hey, you should ask him. Maybe he'd be interested in going to California." And I said, "Okay, sure, I'll have the conversations." And it was a number of conversations that happened, and then there's a committee, right? And in the end, the committee's like, "We like him." So that's how that happened, right? But it's not just like you look in the want ads or something and did it, right? At some point, you're gathering, you know, colleagues, friends, all of these things that you're working together. You're doing that now, even at CalArts. You don't know how that's all going to kind of piece together later. And so you kind of have some faith that that's going to happen, and that's very important. But you're really basing it in hard work, you know, honesty, doing what you say you're going to do. The integrity of those things become very, very important, and that's why people end up trusting you and respecting you.
I feel like as students, sometimes it's a little fuzzy to understand what a president does. How would you describe what you do?
Well, it's funny. I have this conversation with students a lot because students who come from like a high school, they're like, "Well, maybe he's like the principal, right?" but that's not. It's the deans at a place like CalArts. The deans are more like the principal, right? They're the ones who kind of run your school. We have a bunch of schools, so it's like a bunch of high schools together, right? And so there ends up being the kind of overall enterprise. And these things are often they're run by boards. So it's not actually one person, but then the board selects one person to be like, you're the person who's running it, right? You're part of our group, you're part of the board, but you're the one we're asking you to run it, and that's the job. And so that's, I think, what ends up happening. But so much of that is externally focused. Usually presidents in like colleges and universities, 60 to 80% of their job is outside the institution. And that becomes very hard because in a place that's small like CalArts, and students are like, well, why doesn't Ravi come to my show or my this or my that? And in the end, that's often what like deans do, right? Because they're in that space, right? And so if I did all of that, I wouldn't have any time to meet with donors, right? I wouldn't have the time to meet with the elected officials when we need to, if we're like changing something or renovating something, we have to get the permission from the local authorities and all those kind of things. And then the board itself, has to get run and managed, and all that ends up happening as the primary kind of responsibility for me. And then I have to build a team. So the other thing that presidents do is make sure that there's a team of people that help, the deans and the vice presidents that are like, who does facilities, who does admissions, make sure all those people are sort of in place and that they do a good job. And you give people an opportunity, and if they do well, they do well. And if they don't, you have to have those hard conversations, right? But you got to proceed. Again, hard work and honesty become really, really important in doing all of that. Yeah.
And as president of CalArts, what would you say is your mission for the school?
Well, my mission for the school is the school's mission. So what happens is when you lead something, one of the things we do with the board's responsibility is making sure that, okay, there's this entity, right? And it has a mission and has a set of values. And you have to be able to proclaim that. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. Like, what are you doing, right? And so we have our mission, and it's a community of artists. We define who we are. And then in that, it says we seek to transform ourselves, each other, and the world through artistic practice. So it's making the conditions for, one of our former faculty, John Baldessari, said it's a place where art might happen, right? And how does that, and all of the things that are contained with that. And so when young people say, I want to be an artist, right? I want to engage in that. What are all the conditions that are required where art might happen? And you have disciplines and different things, but it's all of the things that that happen here. You have equipment here, you have faculty here, you have projects here, you have all of that, you have your colleagues here, right? Like that, all of that, and making the conditions for that all to be in one place. That's really sort of what we're doing, and that's how that works, right? And so my mission is the institution's mission, and so we that's what you do when you take one of these jobs. You say, okay, this is the mission, and that I agree with that mission, and I can help do that.
I see.
You know what I'm saying? So it's not personal as much as whatever is my personal kind of likes and desires have to agree with that. Otherwise, don't take the job. Otherwise, you're not going to like it. Well, if it's a place that does something that you don't care about, it's going to be very hard to do it, right? And do it well.
And in terms of an art school, what do you consider to be CalArts' greatest advantage?
You mean like small schools that are only of the arts? So as an art school?
Yeah.
That part. Mm-hmm. So you're like other schools that have art or have music or have theater. What's CalArts' advantage in the world with that?
Yeah, and also just like how it helps students who want to become artists in general.
How CalArts does?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Well, it's what I was talking about before, the conditions for what that happens. Some people define what that is very differently. CalArts is a very unique definition that nobody else in the world has. So that's multiple art forms coming together, and it's this notion of creating the new thing that's next. So if you go to a school, let's just pick UCLA's down the road, right? There's big parts of what UCLA does that's committed to the history of art and the history of music and the way things used to be. That's important, right? It's important for us to know and understand that. CalArts as a whole says, okay, that's important only as much as you know that it happened, but it is not the thing that you're studying. You're studying what's next. You're trying to form the new thing. And so students come here thinking, I'm going to make a new piece of work that I am, it's like, it may have these components that existed before, but it's my glue. And that your glue part is really, really important. And that, to me, makes CalArts very special. It's when it was a product of two schools merging. It was a Los Angeles Conservatory of Music and the Chouinard Art School, right? Both of them were struggling financially, right? And schools go through up and downs where things are good and things are bad. But in a moment where they were having trouble financially, Walt Disney and Roy Disney, they come in and he said, well, What about a place that's really thinking about what's next and that? And so he put some extra money in, brought those two things together, and that's transition. I mean, there's stories that go back that is like that was bumpy and things happen, et cetera. But over 50 years now is as a track record of a place that really thinks about what's next. And I think that was very important. So, you know, institutions and things go through transitions. We see them, right? In my lifetime, there was the world looked a certain way. There was the Soviet Union, there was the United States, there was, you know, China, there was Europe, there was no EU, as the European countries, et cetera. And then even in my own lifetime, all of that has shifted, you know, and changed. And Russia, and they came apart, and the European Union came together, and all of these things have happened, right? So that's going to keep happening. Things are just going to keep shifting and happening. And so if you're the place that thinks about what's next, thinking about even yourself and what's next, it becomes very, very important. Like, what are the things that we're doing here? You think about technology and its influence on the conditions to make art happen, right? That's huge. It's changing. It's like opening up all of these things. That should be part of, like, that should be in the community, right? It should be part of the mix. It becomes very important.
Yeah. And are there any like challenges you've noticed in your point of view, just in term for the whole school in general?
The school or schools or
No,
colleges
our school.
Sure, lots. I mean, when you're in a position like mine, you see the good and the bad and everything in between, right? I mean, what you narrow it down a little bit for me. What kind of
One greatest challenge that you want to talk about? Because we talked about advantage, we want to talk about also what
the disadvantage of a place that place is structured like CalArts is the fact that we have to charge tuition for the students. It's the biggest disadvantage, right? Because what happens is, I mean, it takes money to be able to create the conditions that have to happen. And so for a long time, it's like, well, young people who want to be artists, and they could give that amount of money to be in the community for a period of time. You make things, you know, you make projects and stuff like that. You hit a certain attainment, we give you a degree. This is basically what's happening. To say that you were part of the community, you did that, right? But with inflation and the way costs are, and people work here and they have their lives and they should get paid, and all of that just keeps going higher and higher, right? And so just the simple math of, like, you put 1,200 students in a space, you divide the cost of that by the number of students, it's a lot, right? And it's always been a lot for a place like CalArts, right? But I think in a moment where wealth is kind of stratifying in the world, there are definitely far more young people who want and can and deserve to be part of the community than can probably afford that. And there's no easy solution to that, because it's like, you have to give money to a lot of young people, and it's like the structures to do something like that are very tough in the world, right? I think that's the hardest part. You know, that there's every year there's students who apply and get in, and it's great, and they're not able to come, right? And so that, to me, that's the hardest. And I don't have a magic way of saying that's going to change, right? It's fundamental, kind of the way the place is built. At least CalArts is built, right? Other institutions are a little different, but then they're not like CalArts, right? UCLA is different. The state puts a lot of money into it. Money comes from different, but it's huge. It's a big school, so you don't get the kind of, like, your colleagues and attention, and it's not a place solely dedicated to the arts in that way. So that's special, but it's the hardest. I think our greatest strength is in some ways our greatest weakness. That you're focused on the arts, that you can be small and do that, also makes it really hard, because if it were bigger, everybody could pay a little bit less, right? To do something. So it's a scale thing that ends up happening. I think the small schools that do something very special in the world have to find a way to collaborate and team up with one another to get the scale, but keep doing the small special thing. To me, I think that's the future of small schools like a CalArts or an art center, or these kind of small schools that are in the small thousands of students. How do you deal with these bigger schools like the UCLAs or the University of Texas, or when they have part of government, right? Because they have tax money and they're big, right? So how would you do that? It was like, I think, working together and say, what things can we share, and what things are really special in these communities? That's super interesting, right? And I think that's the future of the small places. Going it alone is not going to work. And I like that metaphor better anyway, collaboration instead of competition.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Do you think that future is near?
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, you know that because we've had colleagues in San Francisco that have gone out of business. So yeah, I mean, I think that you can deny that that's what's necessary, right? That collaboration is necessary, but only so long, and at some point it's too late. So the fear of, like, changing and happening what's new, that can be paralyzing. And what I hope is, this is a very creative community, not to be afraid of doing like that. That becomes very important. Listen, I mean, our CalArts exists because 2 schools came together and created something out of it, right? Like, so what if 3 or 4 more schools come together and create something? That's cool, right? And to me, it's almost like art itself, right? You're like creating a new thing. That's exciting.
I see. I see.
That's facts.
Yeah. Also, like the industry right now is changing. We see the advancement of AI and other technologies. One
You mean the arts industries, right? There's many. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, generally speaking.
Yeah.
We're animation students, so we kind of know more about the animation.
Yeah,
thing.
sure.
But yeah, we wanted to, because there is that fear and also that anxiety about like job prospects or just technology and stuff. What's your perspective on that? How is CalArts preparing us potentially for that?
CalArts has always, even before this moment, prepared young people for those kind of changes. Because remember I said that it's not about job training. Ultimately, you can learn to do the thing and then go get the job, right? You don't need a school to help you do that. But the school gives you each other, gives you a kind of, it's helping you train your mind, train the ideas, train those processes, right? Those structures become really important and they're applicable to anything. That's where you want to transfer the kind of generative curiosity and creativity that you're allowed, regardless of what happens. That can't be automated easily, if at all. So that's the advantage, is actually places like, think of even like law school, right? Things that lawyers do in terms of parsing arguments and looking at contracts, that's going to be able to be automated. We know that, right? We can see that happening, right? So something like being a lawyer is going to be much harder to, it's going to be very disruptive, I think, in this place, particularly with things like contracts or taxes or any of those things that happen, the rules, right? So think about animation. There's parts of what happens in animation that have been available, I think, to young people, and they come out and you have to you're doing tweening and you're doing like some kind of job, right? And it pays you money because it has to get done, but you're really thinking about the stories and the ideas and your own work. But you can do that to kind of put money on the table, and they kind of relate to one another. But if you really think about it, what you do is make stories and make ideas and make those animations. You're just doing this for a paycheck. They happen to be related, right? You're going to find other things to do to make a paycheck that are related in the new environment. The thing that the new environment and these changes technology can't do is that generative creativity thing that you bring, the unique thing that human beings can put out in the world. That is not automatable, right? And it's not going to be in our lifetimes, yours and mine. It's just not. And that sentient, that space, I mean, they can approximate things, right? Computers are really good at doing things over and over and over and over and over and over again, right? But it's like making the new things, putting it in a different order. They're getting better at that, but it's still not something that human beings can do so quickly. We just do it, right? And you think the speed of that it's a long ways off. It's Star Trek. This is hundreds of years off probably, right? But that doesn't mean that things aren't going to change right now. Right, jobs aren't going to change right now. But even in my lifetime, that's happened for a lot of things, right? So I have a lot of faith that young people are going to be able to do those things and figure it out. But it'll be different than it was 10 years ago. There's no question, right? It already is probably. Yeah. And so these industries, remember, they're industries: art, entertainment. The animation is in the space of entertainment. It's in the space of art. It's in the space of and entertainment is broad. It's like, are you watching something? Are you going somewhere and doing that? All of that is big and wide, and like immersive kind of location-based stuff is all new, right? The sphere is just the one thing, and it's kind of new. Those things are going to start to happen. When people want to go to a movie, it's all of that stuff that's going to start to engage, and they're going wide to be entertained, right? So entertainment is going to change. Art is going to change. If you think about museums and galleries, all of these ways that we engage it, going to a concert, you can already do that at home, and it's going to keep evolving, right? So it won't be what's been in the past, but new opportunities will happen. I think young people are poised to be like, oh, those new opportunities are great. I'm going to do something in that space.
Yeah.
And you're bold, right? Because you don't necessarily have this kind of emotional connection to the thing that happened before. Great. So that's why I think it's going to be good for young people. They'll be able to, as long as they're curious and engage what's next.
So just to circle back on the cost of art education, I was wondering what advice or maybe words you would say to people who maybe they did get into the school but they can't come, or they just didn't even apply because they know they won't be able to come, or just students here who struggle to finish, but they really want to succeed as artists. What would you say to them?
Each one of those is a different case, right? Yeah. I'm the president of CalArts. So CalArts and the community chose me to be the president. I didn't go here, right? So they trust me enough to help create the conditions for what we call CalArts, but I didn't actually go here. So it's not necessary to go to CalArts necessarily to know what CalArts does and put out into the world, right? And even if I could have gone to CalArts, I'm like one of those students. Even if I had applied and gotten in, I wouldn't have been able to afford to go for my undergraduate. I grew up in Oklahoma, and I wouldn't be able to do that, right? But as we were immigrants, it's just not, that wasn't going to be the opportunity. But I found a way to do it in another way, right? So I always say there's like more than one way to skin a cat, which is kind of a funny way, Oklahoma, right? There's more than one path to doing what you're doing. So I would hate for someone to think, I want everybody who thinks that wants to be part of the CalArts community to apply, right? Because you apply and you go through the process of applying, and I think that's really great. Because you get in doesn't mean you have to go if those things don't line up. That's very important, because it's like it does for some people, it's risks for other people, and that's fine, right? I think there are other ways to do it. I mean, you think about actually our character animation program, that happens a lot. I hear a lot of stories where like, this is the 5th time I've applied, right? Because they don't get in and then they get some advice, and then they redo it and they don't get in and they get it, but they're improving, right? It's just taking them a little bit longer. They didn't do it right when they're 19. So what? I mean, life's long, right? I mean, you go part-time, go do different things, come about it. We have a great program in the music school with LA City College, right? Where it's like you could take 2 years at LA City College and then finish your BFA in 2 years. And LA City College is free because Herb Alpert, just like he gave us money, he gave LA City College, so it would be free for music students there, right? So there's a way to do that, and it's like half the overall cost or less, right? So there are ways to do it, right? And I think that that's really important. But the fire to want to do it should never go away. That's not related necessarily to CalArts, right? That's related to you. And I think that's the thing to never forget. So it could be disappointing. A lot of things are disappointing in life. I really want to go. It doesn't happen. Life is unfair. It's absolutely unfair. Things are unfair in life. And like I said, even I would not have been, college was an amazing experience for me to go as an undergraduate, and I wouldn't have been able to afford it. So I didn't. I got to the state school where I was, right? And I worked while I went to school.
How do you stay engaged with the concerns and perspectives of CalArts students?
That's great. I mean, the whole point of me being here is to create the conditions for the students. That's my viewpoint and like my job, and why would I lead a school, right? And so what you're talking about is really, really important to me. And it's always, since I've come here, I try to find every way that I can, right? So, I think the student government, when I first came, the student government was so involved and engaged, I think, in sort of like saying, okay, we elect representatives from all the schools, and concerns come up, and we were able to meet. And since I came, really engaging the student government and empowering them to be that voice, to be able to do that, because there are far more students than there are anything else. There are more students than there are staff or faculty or me, right? And so it ends up coming up with like a system to be able to do that becomes very, very important, right? I think what ends up happening is that, and it's hard for a student to know, like, well, what does the president versus what does a dean do? Like, what's in my discipline, or what does a program director do? Because that's in my program, much less than the school, right? And so it's not like students necessarily know that, but I think the hope is that once we engage with students by going to the union, the students' union, and having conversations and being able to bring things to the table, that's those things that can surface can get rerouted to a dean or a program director, and we could know those things. And CalArts, one of the things we've been trying to do since I've been here is to get better at saying, okay, well, here are the things we're thinking about and changing, right? Because what happens is students are here 2, 3, 4 years, and they don't know that they're working on something. So being able to put that, like maybe in a central place, like on the hub or something, becomes really, really important. Because you come in here and you don't realize they've been working on it for 1.5 years or something. And so it just seems like nobody's thinking about this. I was like, yeah, I've been thinking about it, but there's a trade-off, right? Like, it's like, if you do this, then you might have to give this up. What does that mean? And that's, I think, what a lot of times faculty members and staff members are working on, right? Because there's often the things that get sticky are there no easy answer. Think about this notion of being able to take classes outside of your discipline versus taking classes that are required in your discipline, right? Each program is really different at CalArts in terms of the number of credits that are allowed and to do that, right? So I think CalArts as a whole, more than any other school in the arts, has the most flexibility in that space. Yet there are programs like character animation that are not very flexible. Graphic design, right? They have a lot of required credits because the faculty believe that's what the discipline requires, right? But it doesn't mean that you shouldn't have graphic design or character animation. It just means that that particular program is less porous, if you will, right, than art Art's one of the most porous ones. Now, if you think about other art programs in the country at a place like RISD or a lot of the other schools, they're not porous at all. If you just compare that one program, our BFA versus another BFA, it's amazingly loose here, right? And so that's very special, right? But it doesn't make it that art program better than the character animation program. You know, they're just different, right? And so those, I think, differences become hard because students are all in all these disciplines. It's small. You talk to somebody else like, I get to do that. Why don't I get to do that? And so, you know, I hear that from the students all the time. This is notion of like interdisciplinary. Well, what does that really mean? The spaces between, right? And some students define that as like, I'm working with a music student into this and making something, but that's not truly right? That's like making a film. And those are the components of a film. There are people who are saying, okay, so the three of us coming together and we're all thinking about the idea together. So it's not just me. It's like, that's interesting. And I think on the student level, those projects are there. How do we make that more present in the curriculum? That could be very interesting, right? And so I think that's what, if you talk to faculty who are interested in doing that, figuring out how to make that happen, I think that's super unique and super interesting. But there's always the trade-off, right? It's just like, if I'm a faculty where we require a lot of credits, you're like, there's a reason that you require them, right? So like, are you going to lose something? And those are the debates, I think, that happen, right?
And in what ways can students actively contribute to shaping a stronger CalArts community, you think?
Students.
Yeah.
Participate in the union.
Get involved in those kind of things, right? I think one thing I see young people do in an incredible way now that maybe 30 years ago was not maybe so part of the social fabric is thinking about society and how to sort of engage and give back. That to me is awesome, right? And I feel like over a period of many years, that's maybe degraded in formal ways. We used to teach, you know, this is how you serve each other and this is how you help society, right? Like sometimes that comes through like religion or church or temple or something like that. And sometimes it comes from family, right? But I think as the world and people move around and stuff, it's almost like not as formally there anymore for us when we're growing up. And so it becomes really important to say, there's not only real value in that in society for us together, there's real personal satisfaction when you get that, right? And I think you all know that when you help somebody else, it makes you feel good. And that's okay. It's actually good to feel good because you help someone else. That's enough reason. It doesn't have to be some moral high ground where it's like, well, it's the right thing to do. It's like, it's okay that when you help someone else or do something, it makes you feel good. That's enough. And I think experiencing that and knowing that for young people, you know, like how they get involved and do that. It's like CalArts is this greater thing. Get involved and do that. The disciplines that you're in, even like each other, right? That's I think how students can really be active and kind of form a practice as part of their practice of what do they do with one another in the world. That's very strong and very important.
And just to wrap things up, what is your top priority for CalArts 2025?
You know, this thing that we're talking about in terms of collaboration with other schools, really that comes right at the heart of why these schools are very expensive when they're small. And so, and again, change is tough because it's like you do something very special and very specific. What could you change a little bit so that you can collaborate with others to make it more sustainable and be able to invite more people, make it less expensive, those kind of things, right? I think figuring those things out and being bold, that's the key. That's the key. Think about technology and art. Like that space is so changing the art. Well, you can't just sit there. We have to find ways to bring that technology to the table and let the students experiment with it and do that stuff. But it's really expensive. So this is where collaboration, how do we work with tech companies and people to say, hey, bring this to the table and do that. That becomes really, really important. So it's not just these things in isolation in the world.
Mm-hmm. Just one last question. Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you feel like students should know?
There's a lot. Never forget, regardless of, life's going to take you a lot of places, right? It's never going to be a straight line. I guarantee you, right? It wasn't in mine. If you look at like everything I've done, it just seems very circuitous. Like, well, why did he do that? Why did it? It's because opportunities presented themselves, right? And when you see it and it's like, oh, I should do that, then do it. Be bold that way. Don't be afraid to take opportunities and try something. Even if it doesn't maybe make 100% sense. It's like, oh, is that the next thing? And whatever. It's like, have some faith that they'll all stitch together over time because you're all very young. Like, you don't know how that's going to stitch together. All the things I did from growing up in Oklahoma all the way to to being the president of CalArts helped me be the president of CalArts. I didn't know it at the time, but it did. So don't underestimate the way those things synergize with one another. You can't see it yet, but it'll, after the fact, you'll be able to see it. That faith is really important. I think young people, when I was young, it was the hardest thing for me to understand. And I kind of was just like, oh, well, I'll figure it out, right? And so if I could give advice to my younger self, I'd be like, it's more than just, oh, well, I'll figure it out. Go chase that. Do it.
Right. Don't be afraid of it.
Cool. Okay. And that's
great.
all we have. Thank you so much.
Great.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah, this is great. This is fun. Thank you all for doing it.